Hey there. Today I want to talk about Nova Scotia's ban on going into the forest, which they claim is to keep people safe. And I want to talk about the problem with this safety above all else ideology, which is sometimes called safetyism, as well as Canada's nanny state. And I'll tell you what we are doing about it at the Canadian Constitution Foundation. I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the litigation director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing legal cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember, nothing in this video is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. Okay, so what the heck is happening in Nova Scotia? Well, on August 5th, Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston announced a province-wide ban on entering the woods until October 15th. This was done by way of proclamation under a provincial statute called the Forests Act. And what this proclamation did is ban hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles like ATVs in the woods. Now, this applies to Crown land, which is about 89% of Canada's land, most of it managed by provinces like Nova Scotia. But the ban actually even goes further. It applies to private property as well if you have forested property. You can go into your own property. Well, thanks for that, I guess. But you cannot invite other people to come onto your property if it's to go into the forest. So no inviting your mom over to walk her dog with you in the woods. And if you do, the fine for violating this forest ban is $25,000. Now, the Premier says that this is due to an elevated wildfire risk. And yes, there are dry conditions in Nova Scotia, and preventing wildfires is important. A wildfire in 2023 did a lot of damage to Nova Scotia. Many houses were burned. A huge amount of forest was burned. And one of the purposes of the Forests Act, that piece of legislation this proclamation is made under, one of the purposes is preventing and mitigating wildfires in a changing climate. So it is the province's responsibility to prevent and mitigate fires. But the ban here does too much, because walking in the woods, fishing, having a picnic, bird watching, these things do not cause fires. Ban fires. That makes total sense. You can ban fires. That would prevent forest fires. And in fact, there are fire bans in place in parts of Canada every single summer. Look, I even understand the ban on vehicles. I can see that rationale. You know, an ATV or a motorbike in the woods can have a hot exhaust pipe that could spark a fire if left in a pile of leaves. So there is a logical chain of reasoning there, but it makes no sense to ban walking. And it also makes no sense to have this ban in places where there are not active fires or this heightened, really severe risk. It is applying across the entire province. And it would make sense to ban entering the forest where there is an active fire, for example. That's the approach that's taken in British Columbia, where fires happen very regularly. Devastating fires happen in BC every season. There are bad fires in BC right now happening. And what that province does is they create exclusion zones. So they will have areas where you can't go into the forest, but they're in specific areas. They're not just all forests in the entire province. So BC is divided into different fire centers, and they have different levels of exclusion for different activities. So they might create a prohibition on a campfire or on different types of what are called open fires. These are pile fires that you might see on a farm, or they might create a forest use or area restriction. If there's an area restriction, though, they will publish a map of what is restricted. So, for example, I'll put up a map of a restriction in BC Prince George Fire Center that's in place right now. This is related to the Kiskatuna River wildfire, and this is the map of where it applies. So these exclusion zones, they do exist for good reason. There's an active fire. You don't want people to get caught in an active fire, and you don't want them interfering with firefighting activity. But in comparison, Nova Scotia has currently 4 active wildfires that are under control, but they have banned going into any forest, even to walk in areas where there are no fires. Now, in Canada, we have access to Crown lands, which, as I said, is mostly managed by the provinces, and Crown land can be used for things like hiking, camping, fishing, or hunting with a license, canoeing, but it's a regulated right. The province can put restrictions on our access to Crown land, and it can even restrict how we use private land. But just because something is regulated does not mean that the government has absolute, untrammeled discretion to do whatever they want. In Canadian administrative law, discretion refers to the ability of a decision maker, cabinet, government, an official, to choose between different permissible options when they're making a decision. But this discretion is not unlimited. It needs to be exercised lawfully, reasonably, and fairly. So discretion must be exercised within the bounds of the law and for the purposes of that is intended by the statute. It needs to be exercised reasonably. It needs to be justified, transparent, and intelligible, and reflect a rational chain of reasoning. It cannot be based on irrelevant factors. This is all from a Supreme Court case called Vavilov. So here, I think that there is some administrative law vulnerability to this forest ban. There's just zero connection between walking in the woods and preventing wildfires. Walking does not cause wildfires. And to make some deduction that when people walk, they might also do something else that causes a fire is just too much of a stretch. It's like saying people can't drive their cars because they might run people down on the sidewalk, or people can't walk on the sidewalk because they might punch someone in the face. You can ban the dangerous activity or the illegal activity without preventing the zero risk activity. Anything else is irrational, and it's couched in this terrible ideology of safetyism where no risk is acceptable. Safetyism is a mentality where risk becomes an excuse for control. It's a belief that safety, especially protection from physical or even emotional or mental harm, should be prioritized above all else, even at the cost of other fundamental values like freedom or autonomy or open debate. It often starts with what seem like good intentions, protect people from danger. But when safety becomes the highest value, governments, institutions, or even individuals begin to justify really extreme restrictions and overreach in the name of protecting the public. And it creates a culture where any risk is seen as intolerable, any disagreement or dissent is viewed as dangerous, and state control is normalized for your own good. Once a government sees that this overreach is workable, it's replayed over and over and over again every few years. And that's what we are seeing happen in Nova Scotia, because this is not the first time Nova Scotia has done this. They did it in 2023. They banned going in the woods in 2023 and in 2016 and in 2001. But when they did it in 2016, the fine was only $180, not $25,000. And it used to be, I think back in 2023, the fine was $237. But then the Nova Scotia government amended one of the offenses in this whole slate of fire-related offenses to $25,000 after those 2023 fires, when the government and all of the people in Nova Scotia were freaked out and upset about the damage that fire had caused. So they increased one penalty to $25,000. But because $25,000 is just absolutely insane, grossly disproportionate, and overkill, the Crown, when these tickets were coming in, they were plea bargaining them away to other lesser fire-related offenses. So then the government responded by amending the whole slate of these offenses to all be $25,000. But in a funny, technical point, these are not mandatory minimums. They're just out-of-court settlements. They're amounts that people can pay if they don't want to appear in front of a judge. A separate provincial statute actually allows the judge to remit all or some of the penalty to zero. So, true to form, this is all for show. It's so that the Nova Scotia government can act tough in front of the cameras. They just want to be seen as doing something, even if it is not anything meaningful. And they even created a tip line where they encourage you to snitch on people who you might suspect of, going for a picnic. I mean, does this give anyone else COVID deja vu? Remember when we were encouraged to snitch on our neighbors for hosting an illegal gathering like a family dinner? When the government says everything is dangerous, everything can be controlled. But when safety becomes a weapon, we all lose. So we at the CCF wrote to the Premier of Nova Scotia encouraging the government to rescind this ban, just act normally, ban fires, not walking. And even more than that, I think that the Forest Act doesn't even permit the province to ban walking in the woods for the whole province. While the Forest Act contemplates restricting travel into particular zones to protect the forests, it is unreasonable to interpret this part of the act as authorizing a blanket province-wide ban on activities that pose no serious risk of sparking a fire. This blanket travel ban in the proclamation infringes the right to liberty protected by Section 7 of the Charter. It limits common law rights to use public lands, and it might also impact Aboriginal and treaty rights that are protected and guaranteed under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. And of course, as I said, this $25,000 fine is grossly disproportionate. So we've also made it possible for you to tell the Premier what you think of the forest ban with a petition to keep Nova Scotia trails open. It's at the ccf.ca/restore access to NS forests, Nova Scotia forests. So please go and sign it and share the petition on social media. We're also considering bringing a legal challenge to the forest ban, depending on how the government responds to our letter and to our petition. And one of the things that this whole experience has done is make me kind of sad and honestly frightened about the number of people that defend this type of thing. The number of people who would willingly submit to an authoritarian policy because the government tells them it is to keep them safe. And that is really depressing. A lot of people are saying online that a massive $25,000 fine for walking is a good deterrent. I mean, we don't even have fines like that for certain criminal offenses. Other people are saying, people might walk, but when they do, they might also smoke. Okay, well, if people are let outside their homes, they may also commit a crime. The solution isn't to lock everyone inside. That is some Minority Report thinking and very authoritarian. And governments have historically done all kinds of atrocious things in the name of safety. The War Measures Act was used in response to the October crisis to keep people safe. It was one of the greatest violations of civil liberties in Canada. The cancellation of Sean Foyt's concert permits that happened recently, that was done in the name of safety. The internment of Japanese Canadians was justified as safety. And of course, COVID restrictions were all done to keep us safe. To me, this feels like a real muscle memory being triggered and being told that where I can and cannot go in order to keep other people safe. And the same people who defended those COVID lockdowns that kept our children out of school and destroyed local businesses are now defending this fire lockdown. So please go sign our petition, send a message to the Premier that this is not okay. I also have a report coming out next week about some of the worst examples of government overreach in the name of safety. If you sign up for our email update list at the ccf.ca/freedom updates, you'll receive that report coming out next week where I go through the top 10 worst examples where the government has violated civil liberties in the name of safety. This overreach in the name of keeping us safe and protected needs to stop. Government isn't my dad. I don't need them telling me where I cannot go and what is best for me. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.